Now you would think that after me explaining to Eric what was going on and him seeing for himself, he would reconsider. Take a moment to reflect on what has happened and come up with a new plan. However, pride kicked in, and man, when I tell you that he decided he was going to go to war with the creatures in the woods, he did. Eric bought even more land, mind you. He has not been able to build a house yet, but he sinks more money into the project. This was done at the advice of the witch he was seeking wise counsel from, and what I will say is this. That was the worst decision that this man probably has ever made in his life. It was at this point, when 6 bulldozers came in, that I knew Eric didn't stand a chance. We are all at my house having dinner, Gordon and I are talking, and he is asking me why I didn't explain things to Eric, and I tell him I did, gave it that good old Boy Scouts try, and he wouldn't listen. That is when Gordon shares with me what has been going on at his house, that it has been silent, quiet as a Baptist church on Saturday morning. He says, when the woods go quiet like that, it is not a good sign. We all knew he was right, but what could we do? This point right here is where I first encountered the dream walker, that witch, walking into my dreams and interrogating me. Stop right here for a moment, and let me teach you something that I learned the hard way. The dream realm is real, very real, as I have told you before, but I didn't know that a person could come into your dreams. One night I'm asleep, and I'm having this dream that my family and I are sitting at the dinner table talking. But there is this other person there in the conversation. It's a female, and I can't see her face, but she is asking all these questions. One I remember clearly was, have you seen an altar in the woods? I remember answering the question in the dream and waking up at 4 a.m. feeling like I was violated, then going right back to sleep and into the same dream, where I was being asked questions, and then I said, I'm not telling you anything else, and the person gets up and walks out of the house. This goes on for about 3 more nights until I talk to Warren, and he says his dreams have been crazy, people asking him questions, people he does not know. Then it is confirmed by Gordon that he is experiencing the same thing. We are all sitting around talking one day when Warren excuses himself and says he will be right back. He's gone for 30 minutes and comes back with Frank's diary and starts to read about the dream realm. And he said, I knew I had heard of this before. Grandpa used to have people come in his dreams once in a while. Some would share information with him. Others would try and get information. That is when I learned the true meaning of the wheat and the tares in the Bible, Matthew 13:24-30. Another parable he put forth to them, saying, the kingdom of heaven is like a man who sowed good seed in his field. But while men slept, his enemy came and sowed tares among the wheat and went his way. But when the grain had sprouted and produced a crop, then the tares also appeared. So the servants of the owner came and said to him, Sir, did you not sow good seed in your field? How then does it have tares? He said to them, An enemy has done this. The servants said to him, Do you want us then to go and gather them up? But he said, No, lest while you gather up the tares, you also uproot the wheat with them. Let both grow together until the harvest, and at the time of harvest I will say to the reapers, First gather together the tares and bind them in bundles to burn them, but gather the wheat into my barn. Frank had meticulous notes on this scripture that explained that we are God's field, our body, spirit, and soul, that God is always planting in his field. However, there are those who come along at night and plant alongside what the Lord had planted in our life. He goes on to explain that when Adam was with God, the dream realm is where he communicated with him what he could not during the daytime. But when Adam fell, all of creation fell with him, opening the entire creation to the influences of darkness, including the dreams of man. Frank furthermore explained that sleep is only for men. Angels don't sleep, spirits don't sleep. They rest, and that God never sleeps or slumbers. That sleep is only for the world of men, including animals. Frank laid out how he stopped people from dream walking, and it was all in that scripture, a true understanding of what was being said. It was angels coming to the Lord, informing him that tares were planted, and that the Lord gave specific instruction to tear up the tares, bind them, and burn them. That the tares were demonic programs sown into our body, soul, and spirit. waiting on a day to manifest in our lives. Also, that the enemy could be a person, a spirit, or a fallen angel. So we must ask the Lord to reap the harvest early and separate the wheat from the tares and burn the tares and arrest the enemy. We are all there looking at each other after he reads this and are like, wow, that is wild. However, we prayed right then and there in that moment. And when I tell you that it was like electricity flowing in our bones, it was crazy. That night, I went to sleep, and it was the most peaceful dreams I had ever had. The next day, Eric is back, and they are clearing more land, something that we all knew would stir up everything in the woods. That is exactly what happened. He decided to hire a security crew to guard the property at night. That only lasted for 2 nights. The first night, it sounded like a zoo outside, all the noise coming from that side of the road where his property was. But the second night is when the gunfire started, small arms, but they started shooting. My family and I spent time on the floor trying not to get shot. That shooting lasted about 15 minutes. Then you can hear the trucks starting up and peeling out down the road. The next morning, Eric is back, and at this point, he is not speaking to me anymore. He just gives these evil glances like I'm the reason he has problems. However, at this point, it was his problem, not mine. They continue to clear the land, and it just gets worse. Over the next few days, an entire bulldozer disappears. Now, you explain to me how an entire bulldozer goes missing. The thing was dragged off into the woods. That was the most amazing thing I have ever seen. This goes on back and forth, him taking land and them destroying his equipment. One day he tells me that he has lost over $500,000 in equipment. I simply say, Eric, you need to leave it alone. It will only get worse. He looks at me, and again that pride kicks in and says, I have never started a job and didn't make money. I will not lose to some monster in the woods. Eric was serious because the next day there was a crew of hunters that came out. 6 men went out into those woods with rifles, and I knew that we would not hear from those men again. Imagine for days those men's trucks were parked right out on the road and never came back. I'm not sure where they were from, but after 4 days, their trucks were loaded on the back of 2 trucks and taken away. Never heard or seen from them since then. The next time I saw Eric, he looked down and dejected. He tells me he is having problems with the bank. From there, it only went downhill for Eric. Part of me felt sorry for him, but at the same time, it was his decision to make. Years later, that land still sits untouched, undeveloped. The last I heard about Eric, he went bankrupt. I never really ventured into the woods across the road from my house. Hell, I had my hands full with everything that was going on behind me. Then, after years, Warren and I decided to take a walk in those woods. The 2 of us are just walking along, talking about how crazy things had been, the death of Liz, the birth of little Frank, all the stuff that happened. In that moment, I realized that Warren had become a man. Although he was left with a good amount of money, he was managing it and his family well. I was proud of him. We walked for about 35 minutes before we started to hear what sounded like metal clacking together, but the sound was coming from above our heads. We looked at each other and turned around to start to leave. We were on our way back, and this noise was just constant, and it was forcing us to look up and around, and I noticed that the wind was blowing in the trees, but it was weird. We didn't feel any wind on the ground. We kept walking, and it was like we left the sound behind, but you could still hear it. Warren says he wants to go back and see what it was, because it doesn't make sense to him. I vote against it, and we go home. Well, the next day, about 12 noon, Warren shows up and tells me, "You've got to see this," and tells me to follow him back into those woods. Now there is no noise at all. Then when we get in that area, the noise starts again. He says, "Look up at the tree." When I look up, it's 2 pieces of metal hung on a rope, and this rope is going from tree branch to tree branch, and you can see that it's being tugged. This is when I learned that there were little people in these woods, because we follow that rope, and the next thing I know, 2 hours have passed, and we did not walk for 2 hours. Hell, we did walk for over 300 yards, but it took 2 hours, and I was tired. When I realized what was happening, we turned around, and that is when I saw one of them. Listen, have you ever seen something and did a double take? I mean, look at it twice. That is what I did. Right next to a tree was this little greenish being, and it was just looking at us and smiling, showing its yellow and black teeth. I tap Warren and tell him to look, and he is like, "What the hell is that?" Then it vanished right before our eyes. Now, what was crazy is that everything else in these woods brought on fear. This thing just brought on confusion. I mean, like stumbling words, trouble thinking confusion. Over the next few days, I just felt off. My words were not clear, my thoughts were not clear. It was pure insanity. And when I talked to Warren, he was dealing with the same thing.